Dr. Sarah Chen's fingers moved across the holographic interface with the precision of a surgeon, her movements so economical they barely disturbed the air around her. The Emergency Operations Center of the International Space Station Nexus hummed with controlled tension, a cathedral of technology where 40 engineers monitored humanity's most ambitious orbital construction project. Into this temple of concentration strode Director Marcus Caldwell, his presence announced by the sharp crack of expensive shoes against the composite flooring. Dr. Chen. His voice carried the weight of a man accustomed to immediate attention. I've been reviewing your credentials. Theoretical physicist. Published papers on quantum mechanics and materials science. Very impressive, for academia. He paused, letting the silence do its work. But tell me, Doctor, have you ever actually built anything? Or is your experience limited to blackboards and computer simulations? A ripple of uncomfortable laughter spread through the younger engineers. They glanced at Sarah Chen, a slight woman whose gray jumpsuit seemed to swallow her frame. Her face remained perfectly still, her dark eyes fixed on a secondary monitoring station displaying streams of telemetry data. She offered no defense, no justification. Her silence was absolute. Director Caldwell had arrived from Earth that morning for the final phase of Project Artemis, the deployment of the station's revolutionary fusion core. He was a builder of skyscrapers, a man who'd made his fortune in concrete and steel, and he'd been brought in to inject some practical reality into what he considered an ivory tower operation. To him, the quiet Dr. Chen represented everything wrong with the project: too much theory, not enough dirt under the fingernails. But across the operations center, senior systems engineer Marcus Webb saw something else entirely. Webb had been in space for 15 years, his weathered face and calloused hands a testament to coup. Less EVAs and emergency repairs. He noticed the way Chen stood, perfectly balanced even in the station's gentle rotation, her body instinctively compensating for forces most people couldn't even perceive. He saw how her hands rested on the console with a familiarity that spoke of thousands of hours, not with this system, but with the fundamental principles it represented. Director Caldwell saw a theorist. Engineer Webb saw a coiled spring. If you believe real expertise whispers while ignorance shouts, remember to subscribe to The Final Watch for more stories where quiet competence changes everything. The director continued his tour of the operations center, his commentary a constant stream of skepticism dressed as wisdom. You see, up here in the real world of engineering, we deal with actual materials, real stresses, tangible problems. He gestured broadly at the main holographic display where the fusion core hung in its deployment cradle, a sphere of impossible complexity worth $70 billion. It's not about elegant equations. It's about knowing what works because you've done it before. Sarah Chen said nothing. Her fingers traced a diagnostic sequence across her screen, checking and rechecking the quantum coherence patterns in the core's magnetic containment fields. She was an island of methodical precision in the director's turbulent wake. The station commander, Colonel James Rivera, stood rigidly beside Caldwell, his jaw tight with suppressed frustration. He knew Chen's real background, or at least the sanitized version cleared for standard personnel files. She'd been sent from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory's Classified Weapons Division to oversee the integration of experimental containment technology into the fusion core. Her official role was technical advisor. Her actual function was to ensure that humanity's most advanced power source didn't become humanity's most catastrophic orbital disaster. The junior engineers, however, saw only what the director wanted them to see: a quiet academic being publicly dressed down by a man of action. To them, it was simple hierarchy, a demonstration of practical experience trumping theoretical knowledge. They interpreted her silence as inability to defend herself, her stillness as uncertainty. What they couldn't comprehend was that her silence was a fortress built over a career they couldn't begin to imagine. It was a discipline forged in places where a single miscalculation didn't mean a failed experiment, it meant a smoking crater where a city used to be. Her calm wasn't the absence of emotion. It was the perfect, deliberate mastery of it. While Director Caldwell spoke about practical engineering, Sarah Chen was conducting a symphony of analysis. Her mind processed thermal differentials, magnetic field harmonics, and quantum decoherence rates with the effortless grace of breathing. She wasn't merely observing the fusion core's status. She was perceiving its quantum soul, understanding it on a level that transcended measurement and entered the realm of intuition. The irony, lost on everyone except perhaps the observant engineer Webb, was that Director Caldwell, the man of concrete and steel, was the most disconnected person in the operations center. He saw the fusion core as an engineering challenge, a problem of materials and forces. Sarah Chen saw the dancing probability waves, the delicate balance of fundamental forces, the whisper-thin margin between controlled fusion and catastrophic failure. The tension in the operations center was palpable, thick as the recycled air they all breathed. The constant low hum of the station's life support systems provided a backdrop to the human drama unfolding. Director Caldwell continued his monologue, using the deployment preparations as his personal stage. He questioned the structural engineer's load calculations, critiqued the trajectory specialist's approach vectors, and generally cast his shadow of condescending authority across every workstation. And through it all, his gaze kept returning to Dr. Chen, as if her refusal to be provoked was a personal insult. He wanted a reaction, stammering, blushing, a clumsy defense of her theoretical background. Her stoicism was a mirror reflecting his own insecurity, and he didn't like what he saw. "The problem with you academic types," he declared, his voice rising to address the entire center, "is that you live in a world of perfect conditions and theoretical ideals. You forget that real engineering is messy. It's about experience, about trusting your gut." He paused for dramatic effect. "You can't learn that from a textbook." Still nothing from Chen. Her focus remained absolute. She adjusted a filter setting, her knuckle briefly touching a small, worn metal plaque on the edge of her console. It was an older interface panel, a legacy system maintained for redundancy. The plaque read simply, "Los Alamos Site Y, 1945. To most of the crew, it was a curious antique. To Sarah, it was a reminder. Colonel Rivera, sensing the escalating tension and the dangerous distraction it created, finally intervened. "Director, we're approaching the deployment window. The core needs to be locked into position within the next 30 minutes. Caldwell puffed himself up. "Excellent. Let's see this miracle of modern science in action." The atmosphere shifted instantly. The deployment was the culmination of 8 years of development and 3 years of orbital construction. Voices became crisp, professional, focused. The casual banter disappeared. "Cradle release mechanism is armed. All safety interlocks are green. Positioning thrusters are nominal. We have a clean trajectory window. Core temperature is stable at operational baseline. Magnetic containment is showing optimal coherence." Director Caldwell nodded approvingly. This he understood, the choreographed dance of a complex operation, the decisive moment of action. He spared one last dismissive glance at Dr. Chen. Her work, he assumed, was done. The theories she'd so carefully developed were now in the hands of the real engineers who'd make them work. He couldn't have been more wrong. The first sign of trouble was a flutter. A barely perceptible oscillation in one of the quantum coherence readings. Sarah Chen saw it instantly. Her posture, already perfect, became absolutely rigid. It was a tiny discord in the symphony of data, a single note that didn't belong, that only a master would recognize. The deployment was supposed to be a flawless execution, a precisely choreographed sequence where every action had been simulated 10,000 times. But the universe, even when contained in magnetic bottles and theoretical models, has a way of surprising you. As the fusion core began its slow drift from the deployment cradle toward its final mounting position, a second anomaly appeared on Sarah's screen. Then a third. They were microsecond duration fluctuations in the magnetic field geometry, invisible to the primary monitoring systems, but unmistakable to her trained eye. Operations, I'm seeing quantum decoherence cascades in the containment field, the sensor specialist called out, her voice steady but concerned. Pattern is non-standard. Recommend we hold deployment. Colonel Rivera leaned forward. Confirm the source. Is this within operational parameters? Negative, Colonel. The pattern is, it's not in any of our simulation libraries. The field is still stable, but it's showing microinstabilities we've never seen before. Director Caldwell's face flushed. What does that mean in English? The chief engineer, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, pulled up a visualization. It means the fusion plasma is exhibiting unexpected behavior. The containment field is holding, but if these fluctuations amplify, we could lose magnetic bottle integrity. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. A containment failure meant the fusion plasma, heated to 150 million degrees Celsius, would contact the physical structure of the core. The resulting explosion wouldn't destroy the station immediately, but it would flood several modules with radiant ion and cripple the power grid. In deep space, that was a death sentence for everyone aboard. Abort the deployment, Rivera ordered immediately. Return the core to the cradle. Sir, the positioning thrusters are showing intermittent response. Something's interfering with the control signal. What? Rivera's voice cracked. That's impossible. Those systems are quintuple redundant. Dr. Tanaka's fingers flew across her console. The magnetic field fluctuations, they're generating an electromagnetic pulse effect. It's disrupting the thruster control electronics. The core is drifting, and we can't steer it. Panic, cold and sharp as vacuum, began to seep into the operations center. The fusion core was now floating free between the cradle and its mounting point, a $70 billion bomb that was simultaneously drifting off course and showing signs of catastrophic instability. Director Caldwell's face went white. The transition from confident authority to existential terror was brutally fast. Can we evacuate? Get everyone into the escape pods? Colonel Rivera shook his head. Not enough pods, and not enough time. If that core breaches containment, the radiation will cook us before we can seal the hatches. The operations center descended into controlled chaos. Engineers shouted suggestions, systems analysts pulled up backup procedures, and the main holographic display became a nightmare of warning indicators and escalating threat assessments. The automated safety systems were trying to regain control, but every command they sent was garbled by the electromagnetic interference. In that moment of absolute crisis, as the machines failed and the humans scrambled, a single calm voice cut through the noise. Colonel, I can stabilize the field and guide the core manually. Every head in the operations center swiveled toward the source of that impossible statement. Dr. Sarah Chen stood at her secondary console, her hands resting calmly on the legacy interface. Her voice was steady, clinical, utterly devoid of fear or doubt. The contrast was staggering. The room was a maelstrom of shouted orders, blaring alarms, and rising panic. Yet Chen stood in her own pocket of absolute calm, her expression as serene as still water. Colonel Rivera, his options exhausted and his crew staring at death, made a decision born of pure desperation. Do it, Doctor. Sarah didn't reply with words. Her acknowledgement was movement, and it was mesmerizing to witness. Her hands descended to the legacy console, not a modern holographic interface, but a panel of physical switches, weighted dials, and analog readouts. It was a direct, tactile connection to the core's fundamental control systems, bypassing the sophisticated but fragile layers of modern automation. She wasn't asking the computer to find a solution. She was becoming the solution. One hand flew across a bank of switches, her fingers moving with impossible speed and precision. She was manually rerouting the quantum field sensors, pulling raw data from 6 different monitoring systems and synthesizing them in real time through pure mental processing. The other hand rested on a large analog dial, making continuous micro-adjustments. On her monochrome secondary screen, vectors and waveforms appeared, raw, unadorned data representing the quantum state of the plasma and the geometry of the magnetic bottle containing it. "What is she doing?" Director Caldwell whispered, his voice hollow with shock. "That interface isn't even connected to the primary control systems." Senior Engineer Webb stepped forward, his voice filled with quiet understanding. "She's not using the primary systems, Director. She's accessing the core directly through the legacy backup systems. That panel gives her direct manual control of the magnetic coil configurations." Manual control? Of a quantum fusion reactor? Caldwell's mind couldn't process what he was hearing. That's impossible. The calculations required, the precision needed, no human being could. "Watch," Webb said simply. Sarah's eyes were locked on her screens, but what she was seeing went far beyond the numbers scrolling past. She was visualizing the quantum waveforms, seeing the probability clouds of the plasma particles, feeling the topology of the magnetic field through pure intuition built on years of experience that no one in this room knew she possessed. Her right hand turned a large weighted dial, adjusting the strength of the primary containment coils. The motion was smooth, continuous, making corrections faster than any computer control loop could process. Her left hand danced across toggle switches, firing microbursts from secondary stabilization coils in a pattern that looked random but was actually a complex rhythm calculated to damp out the oscillations. She was conducting a symphony written in quantum mechanics, playing an instrument more complex than any ever designed, and she was doing it entirely by hand and intuition. "Decoherence cascade is stabilizing," the sensor specialist called out, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Field geometry is returning to optimal configuration." "Impossible," Dr. Tanaka breathed. "The response time, no human neural processing could." Sarah's thumb pressed a sequence of buttons, and the fusion core's positioning thrusters, no longer receiving garbled digital commands but direct analog pulses, fired. In perfect coordination. The massive sphere began to slow its drift, then reverse direction, moving back toward its proper mounting position. "She's steering it," Rivera said, his voice filled with awe. "She's flying a fusion reactor like it's a spacecraft." For 3 minutes that felt like 3 hours, Sarah Chen was the fusion core. Her hands were its controls, her mind was its guidance system, her intuition was its intelligence. She compensated for every drift, corrected every fluctuation, balanced forces that existed in quantum superposition until they collapsed into the exact configuration needed. The core settled into its mounting cradle with the gentleness of a falling leaf. The mechanical locking clamps engaged with a series of solid thunks that echoed through the operation center. The quantum fluctuations, now that the electromagnetic interference from the positioning thrusters had ceased, damped to zero. Sarah's hands lifted from the console. The crisis was over. She had just manually piloted a fusion reactor through a quantum instability using nothing but analog controls and mental processing that bordered on the supernatural. The silence that followed wasn't an absence of sound. It was a physical presence, a weight pressing down on every person in the operation center. It was the silence of minds struggling to comprehend what they just witnessed. It was the silence of assumptions shattering like glass. Director Caldwell opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. His face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and the dawning realization that he had profoundly misjudged the quiet woman he'd been mocking. Senior Engineer Webb was the one who moved. He walked with purpose to a secure terminal at the edge of the operation center, one reserved for highest-level classified access. He placed his palm on the biometric scanner. The screen came to life, demanding multiple layers of authentication. The crew watched, confused. What was Webb doing? Colonel Rivera knew. He'd seen the recognition dawn in Webb's eyes earlier. The engineer had remembered something, a fragment of classified information that suddenly made terrible, perfect sense. The final security layer cleared. A simple search interface appeared. Webb typed with steady, deliberate keystrokes, Chen, Sarah L. The system paused. The silence stretched. Then a personnel file appeared, but it wasn't the standard civilian contractor file they all had access to. This one was stark black text on a white background, with most fields reading, classified, Q clearance required. Webb looked up, his gaze sweeping the operations center before settling on Director Caldwell. When he spoke, his voice carried an authority that transcended rank or title. It was the voice of truth demanding to be heard. "Director, you asked Dr. Chen about her practical experience." He paused, letting the words settle. "I believe her file might provide some clarification." He turned back to the screen, reading words that were invisible to everyone else but whose impact would echo through the station for years to come. "Dr. Sarah Lynn Chen," Webb began, his voice steady and clear. "Graduated MIT at age 19. Dual doctorate in theoretical physics and quantum engineering completed at 23. Declined faculty positions at Princeton, Stanford, and Cambridge." A murmur went through the junior engineers. Impressive, but it still fit the academic narrative. Webb continued, his voice dropping to a more reverent register. "Direct recruitment by Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Assignment." He paused, looking directly at Director Caldwell. "Emergency Nuclear Response Team, Weapons Division." The director's eyes widened. That was NEST, the team that responded to nuclear terrorism threats, that dismantled warheads and defused bombs in the field. Dr. Chen's specialty is listed as Advanced Warhead Stabilization and Criticality Prevention. Webb translated the bureaucratic language with cold precision. "In plain terms, Director, when a nuclear weapon was armed and conventional bomb disposal couldn't touch it, when a warhead was damaged and threatening to achieve criticality, when every other expert said it was impossible to make safe, they called Dr. Chen." The air in the operations center grew thick. Every engineer who had smiled at Caldwell's mockery felt shame burning in their chest. Webb scrolled down. Commendations include the Department of Energy Distinguished Service Medal, the Presidential Medal of Freedom with Valor Distinction, the Carnegie Medal for Civilian Heroism. He trailed off, scanning a long list. Service notes indicate 17 direct interventions on Category 1 nuclear incidents. 17? Colonel Rivera's voice was barely a whisper. Webb looked up from the screen, his eyes hard. 17 times she stood between a nuclear explosion and an American city. The incident in Seattle that the news called a training exercise gone wrong, that was Dr. Chen dismantling a stolen warhead by hand in the back of a moving truck. The gas leak in Manhattan that evacuated 10 blocks, that was Dr. Chen stabilizing a damaged weapon that was showing pre-criticality signatures. The revelation struck like a physical blow. This quiet, unassuming woman wasn't just a physicist. She was one of the most decorated and capable nuclear specialists in the history of the nation. Her calm under pressure wasn't academic detachment, it was the product of standing at ground zero of potential megaton explosions and choosing to act instead of flee. The impossible feat she'd just performed, manually stabilizing a fusion reactor in real time, suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. It wasn't theoretical knowledge applied. It was muscle memory, the same steady hands that had rewired warheads with seconds on the detonation clock, now applied to a different but fundamentally similar challenge. The Los Alamos plaque on her console, Webb added quietly, was from the original Manhattan Project control room. It was given to her by the last surviving member of that team before he died. He told her that she was the only person he'd ever met who had what it took to work with the fire of the sun. Webb shut down the terminal. He walked slowly across the operations center until he stood directly before Sarah Chen, who had finished running her post-crisis diagnostics and now stood at rest, her face as calm as ever. The senior engineer, a man who'd worked in space longer than some of these crew members had been alive, a man who'd shaken hands with presidents and told admirals they were wrong, did something no one in that operations center had ever seen. He drew himself to attention and executed the sharpest, most profound salute of his entire career. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated respect for a peer who operated on a level he could only aspire to reach. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "my apologies. We didn't know." Sarah Chen met his gaze directly. For the first time, a flicker of something crossed her features, not a smile, but a deep understanding, a recognition of the gesture for what it truly was. She returned the salute with a simple, clean motion. "Your apology is unnecessary, Engineer Webb," she said softly. "You were doing your job. As was I." Her eyes moved past him, settling briefly on Director Caldwell. She said nothing more. The silence, now fully understood, was more eloquent than any speech could ever be. Underscore 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 underscore. The story of the Chen protocol spread through the International Space Station Nexus not like wildfire, but like a shift in air pressure. It wasn't loud or gossipy. It was a quiet, pervasive change in how people understood their world. The tale was told in hushed voices in the habitation modules, whispered in the exercise facilities, and shared through silent, knowing nods in the corridors. The crew looked at Dr. Chen differently now. Not as an outsider, not as an academic tourist, but as a protector, a guardian angel wearing the unassuming disguise of a research scientist. Her quiet presence, once interpreted as social awkwardness, was now understood as the profound calm of a true PR. Professional. A warrior who had walked through nuclear fire and emerged with a stillness that no director's bluster could ever shake. The junior engineers were the most deeply affected. They avoided her gaze, their faces colored with shame and awe. They'd been given an unforgettable lesson in one of engineering's most fundamental truths: judge a professional by the quality of their work, not the volume of their voice. Director Marcus Caldwell remained on the station for another 6 hours, a man transformed by humiliation and revelation. The swagger was gone, replaced by a heavy, contemplative silence. He watched as Dr. Chen briefed Colonel Rivera on the quantum fluctuations, identifying their root cause, a manufacturing defect in one magnetic coil that existed at the atomic level, invisible to all normal inspection methods, with a precision that was breathtaking. She spoke of quantum field topology and magnetic domain boundaries with the same calm expertise she would use to explain why the coffee in the galley was better brewed at lower temperatures in microgravity. To her, it was all just physics, problems to be understood and solved. Before Director Caldwell departed the station via shuttle, he did something that would become part of the station's permanent history. He walked directly to Dr. Chen in full view of the entire operations crew. He didn't offer a flowery public apology, his pride wouldn't allow for that. But he did something more meaningful. He looked her in the eye, his gaze stripped of all arrogance, and said in a clear, firm voice, "Doctor, I'd like your unfiltered assessment of the entire Artemis project on my desk within 48 hours. No diplomatic hedging. The real truth." It was a profound act of surrender. He was asking for honest judgment from the woman he'd publicly mocked. It was his way of saying, "I was wrong. Teach me." He then turned to Colonel Rivera and stated, "Commander, I'm formally recommending Dr. Chen for the Congressional Space Medal of Honor. Her actions today saved this station and everyone on it." He didn't wait for acknowledgement. He simply turned and left, a lesser man than the one who'd arrived, but perhaps for the first time in years, a wiser one. The legend had begun. The ripple effects extended far beyond the titanium hull of the Nexus. The classified report sent shockwaves through NASA, the Department of Energy, and the highest levels of government. The Chen protocol became a case study at every engineering school, a stark example of the critical need to bridge human intuition and machine precision. The dusty Los Alamos plaque, once a curious relic, was now maintained with reverence. Its presence was a monument to the day a single expert had proven more capable than $1 billion of automation. The story, in its declassified form, became powerful folklore. It was taught to new astronauts about the dangers of assumption and shared among veteran engineers as a reminder that the most valuable asset in any crisis is a quiet, competent professional. Director Caldwell, to his credit, embraced his humbling. He became an advocate for identifying and respecting expertise in unconventional places. He was often heard telling younger executives, "The person who will save your project might not look like a hero. They might look like the specialist you just dismissed." He never mentioned Dr. Chen by name in public, but everyone knew the ghost he was referencing. His career took on a dimension of wisdom and humility that earned him a different, deeper kind of respect. As for Sarah Chen, she remained unchanged. The crew's newfound reverence seemed to have no effect on her. She deflected all praise with a simple, "The system performed as designed once properly understood." She spent her remaining weeks on the Nexus mentoring a brilliant young engineer named Dr. James Park, a shy but exceptionally talented physicist who reminded her of herself at that age. She didn't lecture him on courage or crisis management. She taught him to read telemetry like a language, to find the ghost signals in data streams, to listen to the hum of a reactor and know when something was wrong. She was teaching philosophy through action. One evening in the observation module, as they calibrated a sensor array together, Dr. Park finally worked up the courage to ask the question burning in everyone's mind. "Dr. Chen, how do you stay so calm when everything's falling apart?" Sarah paused her work, her hands hovering over a tablet. She looked at the young engineer, her gaze direct and clear. "Panic is a luxury, Dr. Park," she said simply. "Competence is a necessity. In a crisis, you focus on the problem in front of you. You execute your function with precision. Everything else is just noise." She paused, then added, "And you trust your training. When you've stood at ground zero enough times, you learn that fear is just another variable to account for, nothing more." Dr. Park understood. The silence wasn't absence of feeling. It was presence of discipline so total that it left no room for anything else. It was the ultimate expression of professionalism. The lesson was passed on. Another link forged in the unbroken chain of human expertise, a legacy of quiet competence continuing forward into the stars. Years passed. The International Space Station Nexus continued its mission, its crew rotating, its technology evolving. But the story of the Chen protocol became part of the station's soul. New arrivals were shown the secondary monitoring station where the old analog control panel now sat preserved behind polished plexiglass. A new brass plaque had been added beneath the Los Alamos original. It read, "At this station on March 7, Dr. Sarah L. Chen demonstrated that the most powerful tool in any crisis is the mind of a single dedicated professional. Let all who serve here remember, competence is quiet." The story had become foundational mythology, a touchstone for the station's identity. It reminded everyone that for all the advanced technology, for all the overwhelming computational power, the decisive element would always be the human factor, the unquantifiable, sometimes unbelievable skill of an individual expert operating at the peak of their abilities. The tale was told to engineering students at every university, a parable about humility and competence. It was shared among emergency response teams worldwide, a testament that the most capable specialists are rarely the loudest ones in the room. The legend of the quiet physicist who manually stabilized a fusion reactor served as a permanent corrective to society's obsession with charisma over capability, image over substance. Director Caldwell eventually retired, profoundly changed by his encounter with true expertise. His final speech at the International Aerospace Forum was not about grand visions or bold leadership. It was about the importance of listening, observing, and respecting the quiet professionals in any field. He spoke of the silent strength that holds complex systems together, the unseen work of specialists and technicians who form the bedrock of any advanced civilization. He never used her name, but every engineer in the audience knew the ghost he was honoring. And Sarah Chen? She remained, as she had always been, a ghost. Her official records showed a transfer to a classified research position. But those who knew understood she had simply returned to the shadows, to the quiet, vital work that civilization required of her. She left no statues, no monuments except that preserved control panel on a single space station. But her true legacy wasn't in brass or plexiglass. It was in the minds of the engineers she'd inspired, in the changed perspective of a once arrogant director, in the institutional memory of an organization reminded of its fundamental truth. Her legacy was a standard of excellence, a quiet ideal that would ripple through the engineering community for generations, a silent, enduring testament to the power of a professional who lets their actions speak for them. The ultimate lesson of the Chen protocol transcends engineering or crisis management. It speaks to a deeper truth about human potential, that the vast, often invisible reserves of skill and courage lie dormant within those most easily overlooked. Sarah Chen's silence was not a void, it was armor. It protected a core of competence so intensely focused, so profoundly disciplined, that it required no external validation. Her lack of ego wasn't weakness. It was her greatest strength, freeing her from the distractions of pride and performance, allowing her to dedicate every ounce of her formidable intellect to the work itself. Her unassuming presence was perfect camouflage, a deliberate choice that allowed her to observe, analyze, and act without the burden of expectation or the distraction of celebrity. In a world that increasingly rewards volume over value, charisma over character, and confidence over competence, her story serves as a powerful counternarrative. It champions the quiet professional, the silent craftsman, the humble master who finds fulfillment not in applause but in flawless execution of duty. It reminds us that respect cannot be demanded, it is earned, an inevitable consequence of demonstrated excellence. The story teaches that assumptions are the enemy of wisdom, and that prejudice is a self-inflicted blindness preventing us from seeing the giants who walk among us. True legacy is not a collection of awards or titles, however impressive. True legacy is the standard you set, the knowledge you pass on, the quiet transformation you create in your field and in the people you touch. It's the Dr. Park who goes on to become a master engineer himself, teaching others that competence is necessity. It's the Director Caldwell who learns to see beyond the surface to the substance within. True legacy isn't what you leave behind in a display case. It's what continues forward in the hearts and minds of others, a silent, powerful current that shapes the future long after your name fades from memory. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, where professional discipline defines true worth, and where the real heroes are the ones you never hear coming, subscribe to The Final Watch, where we celebrate the silent professionals who hold our world together.